The dress blues hung in the closet like a promise. Midnight fabric, brass polished to mirror shine, ribbons stacked in perfect rows across the left chest. Staff Sergeant Derek Shelton stood before them in the dim light of his quarters, one hand reaching out to touch the sleeve. 7 days. That was all that separated him from the medal. 7 days until the ceremony at Fort Bragg, until the flash of cameras and the weight of the Medal of Valor against his chest, until his name joined the list of heroes whose actions under fire had saved American lives. He smiled, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Because Derek Shelton knew something the review board didn't, something the general signing off on his citation would never discover. He knew that the 3 Navy SEALs who died in Syria 18 months ago, the ones his paperwork claimed he'd tried to save, had died screaming his name into radios that went unanswered. He knew that the covering fire he was credited with providing had never been fired. And he knew that the one person who could prove all of it, the one witness who'd carried their bodies out of that hellfire alone, was about to walk back into his life. The notification had come through official channels 3 days ago. Lieutenant Commander Maya Corwin, Navy SEAL, senior survival instructor, would be arriving at Fort McKenzie to serve as evaluator for the Marine Force Recon Advanced Training Cycle, specifically requested by Staff Sergeant Derek Shelton. He hadn't requested her. Someone else had. The light from the hallway cut across his face as he closed the closet door. 7 days was enough time to solve a problem. The desert was a big place. People disappeared in it all the time. And if Maya Corwin happened to be one of them, well, accidents happened during training exercises. Equipment failed. Heat stroke claimed even the most experienced operators. The smile widened. He reached for his phone and typed a message to a number without a name attached. 3 words. "She's coming here." The reply came 30 seconds later. "Then make sure she doesn't leave." Fort McKenzie squatted in the Nevada wasteland like a scab on the Earth's surface. Tan buildings clustered around a central parade ground, chain-link fences strung with razor wire marking the perimeter, guard towers watching the empty horizon where heat shimmered and danced even in October. This was where the military sent people to learn how to survive, how to operate in terrain that wanted them dead, how to become the kind of soldier who could walk into hell and walk back out. Maya Corwin had been walking out of hell for most of her adult life. She stood now in Commander Nathan Cross's office, hands clasped behind her back, eyes forward, posture parade ground perfect despite the exhaustion pulling at her spine. 48 hours ago she'd been running a mountain warfare course in Colorado. 12 hours ago she received orders cutting that assignment short. 6 hours ago she'd landed at Nellis Air Force Base and hitched a ride on a supply convoy heading to McKenzie. She hadn't slept. Didn't need to. Sleep was for people who felt safe. Cross sat behind his desk, a man in his 50s with iron gray hair and the kind of face that looked carved rather than born. He'd been Special Forces once, back when Reagan was president and the Cold War still had teeth. Now he commanded a training facility in the middle of nowhere and tried not to think too hard about the politics that had put him here. "You read the assignment brief." His voice carried the gravel of too many years shouting over helicopter rotors. "Yes, sir." Marine Force Recon Advanced Training, 5-day cycle culminating in 72-hour solo survival exercise in the Mojave. You observe, evaluate, recommend pass or fail. He paused. Staff Sergeant Shelton specifically requested you as evaluator. Maya's face didn't change. Not a flicker. But Cross had been reading people for 3 decades, and he saw the micro-tension in her jaw, the fractional tightening of the fingers laced behind her back. "You know him, not a question." "We've worked together before, sir." Syria. The word hung in the air between them like smoke. Yes, sir. Cross opened a folder on his desk. Inside were pages of typed reports, photographs, maps with grid coordinates marked in red. He didn't look at them. He'd memorized every word 3 days ago when the request had come through channels, and he'd started pulling background files. I read your after-action report from that operation. All of it, including the parts that got redacted in the final version. He looked up. 3 SEALs died because someone decided their Marines were more important, and that someone is about to get a medal for heroism in the same action where those SEALs bled out. Maya said nothing. The Navy recommended you for a Bronze Star for bringing those bodies home under fire. Marine Corps blocked it through inter-service channels. You got reassigned to training duty instead. That about cover it. Sir, with respect, my personal feelings about past operations don't affect my ability to evaluate current training standards. Cross almost smiled, almost. That's exactly the kind of answer that tells me you're the right person for this job. Watch him carefully, Lieutenant Commander. This evaluation is your call. If he fails, the ceremony gets postponed pending review, if enough questions get raised. He let the sentence trail off. Maya's eyes met his for the first time. Brown eyes, the color of desert sand and just as unforgiving. Understood, sir. Dismissed. Trainee orientation is at 1600 hours. Shelton and his team will be there. She saluted, turned on her heel, walked to the door. Her hand was on the handle when Cross spoke again. Lieutenant. She stopped. I can't change what happened in Syria, but I can make damn sure the record shows the truth about what happens here. Do your job. I'll handle the rest. Yes, sir. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a promise. Her quarters were standard issue. Cot, footlocker, desk, chair, window overlooking the motor pool where Humvees sat in neat rows baking under the afternoon sun. She dropped her duffel on the floor and sat on the edge of the cot, feeling the springs protest under her weight. 135 pounds of muscle, scar tissue, and memory that wouldn't fade no matter how many miles she ran or how many training courses she taught. The locked box came out of the duffel first. Titanium, fingerprint-coated, small enough to fit in 2 hands. She pressed her thumb to the sensor and heard the mechanism click open. Inside, wrapped in oil cloth, was a printed document. After-action report, Operation Copper Fang, Syria, 18 months prior. The official version ran 12 pages. This one, the one she'd written before the edits came down from above, ran 27. Page 14 contained the radio transcripts. 04:15 hours local time. SEAL team element pinned down on rooftop extraction point, taking fire from 3 sides, 2 wounded, 1 critical. She'd been on the radio calling for covering fire from the Marine element position 200 meters south. Grid coordinates clear. Line of sight confirmed. Simple geometry. Suppress the enemy, extract the team, go home. Staff Sergeant Derek Shelton's voice had come back over the net. Calm, almost bored. Negative, extracting my team first. Good luck. Then silence. She'd carried Petty Officer First Class Marcus Hale out first, his blood soaking through her plate carrier, his breath coming in wet bubbles. She'd gone back for Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Chen, already dead, but Maya didn't leave people behind. The third, Lieutenant Junior Grade David Park, she'd found with his hand still on the radio, the one he'd been using to call for help that never came. The transport back to base had been a C-130 full of Marines celebrating a successful operation. She'd sat in the back with 3 body bags and written the first draft of her report on a blood-stained notepad while they laughed about near misses and close calls. The investigation had lasted 2 weeks. Shelton claimed he'd made a tactical decision based on immediate threat assessment. His Marines backed him up. The review board, stacked with Marine brass, ruled it a justified call in a complex combat environment. Inter-service politics did the rest. The SEALs who'd been there, who knew the truth, got scattered to different teams. Maya got a letter of commendation for bringing the bodies home, and a quiet suggestion that maybe she'd be happier in a training role. And Sergeant Shelton got recommended for a medal. She closed the box and set it on the desk. Beside it, she placed a small USB drive, black plastic, unremarkable, the kind of thing that could hold family photos or music or 1,000 pages of classified documents. This one held an 11-minute audio file. Radio communications from Operation Copper Fang, unedited, backed up against regulations, kept in violation of about 6 different security protocols. Insurance. Her phone buzzed. Text message from a number not in her contacts. Heard you're coming to Mackenzie. Good, we have unfinished business. No signature, didn't need one. She'd recognize that tone anywhere, the casual arrogance, the implied threat wrapped in false friendliness. She typed back 2 words. See you soon. Then deleted both messages and turned off the phone. The briefing room smelled like stale coffee and the kind of sweat that comes from men who spend their days proving things to each other. Maya arrived at 15:55, early enough to claim a seat in the back corner, late enough that most of the Marines were already there. 23 of them, ranging in age from 22 to 38, all wearing the same desert camouflage utilities, all carrying the same edge of controlled aggression that came with the Force Recon tab. She recognized the type, had been the type once, young enough to think they were immortal, trained enough to almost believe it, smart enough to know that almost wasn't good enough. The room went quiet when she walked in. Not silent, but the volume dropped, conversation stuttering as heads turned. A woman wasn't unusual in modern military spaces, but a woman wearing Navy khakis with SEAL trident and multiple combat deployment ribbons was still enough to draw attention. She ignored the stares, took her seat, pulled out a notepad, and waited. Sergeant Shelton entered at exactly 1600 hours. He'd put on weights in Syria. Not fat, but the kind of bulk that came from gym time instead of field time, from lifting weights instead of carrying wounded teammates. His uniform was immaculate, creases sharp enough to cut, boots polished to a mirror finish. He walked like a man who owned every room he entered, shoulders back, head high, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The smile died when he saw Maya. Just for a second, just long enough for someone watching closely to catch the flicker of something behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. Then it was gone, replaced by the easy confidence of a senior non-commissioned officer addressing his troops. Gentlemen, his voice filled the room without effort. Welcome to advanced training. Over the next 5 days, you're going to learn whether you've got what it takes to operate in high-stress, resource-denied environments. Most of you won't make it. The ones who do will join a tradition of excellence that goes back to— He paused, let his eyes sweep the room, landed on Maya. Well, that goes back to when Marines decided they needed to be better than everyone else. A few laughs, the kind of tribal response that came automatic. Let me introduce Lieutenant Commander Maya Corwin, United States Navy SEALs. She'll be serving as your evaluator for this training cycle. That means she watches, she judges, and she decides whether you're good enough. Try not to embarrass yourselves. He said it with a smile. The words were professional. The subtext dripped contempt. Maya stood, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the introduction beyond a slight nod. Just stood there, letting them look at her, letting them see the scars on her hands and the absolute zero behind her eyes. Staff Sergeant. Her voice was quieter than his, but it carried just as far. Before we begin, I'd like to clarify evaluation standards. Of course, my role is to assess performance against established survival and tactical protocols. Pass or fail recommendations will be based solely on observed competency. Personal history, service branch rivalry, and previous operations will have no bearing on my assessment. She let that hang for exactly 3 seconds, just long enough for him to understand that she was talking about Syria without saying the word. Unless, of course, those previous operations demonstrate a pattern of behavior relevant to leadership evaluation, in which case they become part of the official record. Shelton's jaw tightened. The smile stayed fixed, but his eyes went flat. Understood, Lieutenant Commander. I'm sure your evaluation will be thorough, just like your after-action reports. The room had gone completely silent now. Even the younger Marines, the ones who had no idea what was happening, could feel the electricity in the air. Maya sat down. Shelton continued the briefing like nothing had happened. Outlined the 5-day schedule. Classroom instruction on desert survival, practical exercises in navigation and resource procurement, culminating in the solo 72-hour field evaluation. Each trainee would be dropped at a different point in the Mojave, given minimal equipment, required to reach a designated extraction point using only their training and judgment. Lieutenant Commander Corwin will monitor via GPS tracker and periodic radio checks. She will not intervene except in medical emergency. When you're out there, you're alone. The desert doesn't care about your rank or your tab or how many push-ups you can do. It only cares if you're smart enough to survive it. He clicked to the next slide. A map of the operational area, hundreds of square miles of sand and rock and nothing. Questions? A hand went up. Young Corporal couldn't be more than 24, still had that fresh boot eagerness. Staff Sergeant, will you be participating in the solo evaluation? Shelton's smile widened. Wouldn't be much of a leader if I didn't hold myself to the same standard, would it? I'll be first out. Show you how it's done. His eyes found Maya again. Unless the evaluator has concerns about my qualifications. Every head in the room turned to look at her. She kept her face absolutely neutral. No concerns, Staff Sergeant. I look forward to observing your performance. The briefing ended 20 minutes later. Marines filed out in clusters, heading to the mess hall or the barracks, voices rising as soon as they hit the hallway. Maya stayed in her seat, making notes that didn't need making, waiting. Shelton waited too. When the last Marine left, when it was just the two of them in the fluorescent buzz of the empty room, he walked over to where she sat. Didn't get too close, kept it professional, but the posture was wrong, too casual. One hand in his pocket, weight on one hip, the stance of someone who thought they held all the cards. It's been a while. His voice had lost the projection, dropped to something quieter, more intimate. How have you been, Maya? Lieutenant Commander Corwin, Staff Sergeant. We're not friends. No, I suppose we're not. He tilted his head, studying her like a puzzle he'd already solved. Heard you've been doing good work in training command. Mountain warfare, survival instruction, making sure the next generation doesn't freeze to death in the Hindu Kush. Important work. More important than collecting medals for things you didn't do. His smile never wavered, but something moved behind it. Something cold and quick. That medal is for actions the review board verified. Sworn testimony, official records, everything by the book. He leaned in just slightly. Your book might have told a different story, but it's not the one that got filed, is it? Not yet. Not ever, because you're a professional, Maya. You understand how chains of command work, how decisions get made above your pay grade. You had your say 18 months ago and the people who matter decided I made the right call. He straightened up. Now you're here to evaluate a training exercise. Do your job. I'll do mine. And in 7 days I'll be at Fort Bragg getting the recognition I earned. For leaving my teammates to die. For saving my Marines. Perspective is a funny thing. He turned to leave, got 3 steps toward the door, stopped. One more thing. That after-action report you wrote, the one that didn't make it into the final file, I know you kept a copy. Most operators do. Just want you to know that if it ever surfaces, if you ever decide to go around proper channels, there are lawyers who specialize in handling disgruntled personnel with axes to grind. Defamation. Conduct unbecoming. The Navy takes that kind of thing seriously. Maya stood, moved around the table until she was between him and the exit, close enough now that she could see the flecks of gray in his stubble, smell the coffee on his breath. Is that a threat, Staff Sergeant? It's a professional courtesy. One operator to another. Don't let personal feelings compromise your career more than they already have. She held his gaze for 5 full seconds, didn't blink, didn't look away, just stared into him with the same expression she'd used looking at targets through a scope before the trigger pull. Then she stepped aside. Enjoy the briefing tomorrow, Staff Sergeant. Day 1 starts at 0500. I suggest you get some rest. He walked past her, boots clicking on linoleum, shoulders square. The door swung shut behind him with a pneumatic hiss. Maya stayed in the empty briefing room for another 10 minutes, breathing slowly, counting heartbeats, letting the adrenaline drain out of her system the way they'd taught her in selection, the way she'd learned in 100 combat situations where losing control meant losing everything. When her hands were steady again, she pulled out her phone, powered it on, opened the encrypted messaging app that wasn't supposed to exist on government-issued devices. 3 contacts, no names, just numbers. She selected the first one and typed. He knows I'm here, moving on schedule. The reply came fast. Understood, assets in position, execute on your signal. She deleted the conversation and powered the phone back down. 7 days until the ceremony. 3 days until Shelton's solo evaluation. 72 hours after that until extraction. Somewhere in that window, Derek Shelton was going to make a mistake. He was going to try to solve his problem the way men like him always did, with violence and arrogance, and the absolute certainty that he was smarter than everyone around him. And when he did, Maya was going to be there. Not to stop him. To let him. Because the best way to catch a predator wasn't to chase it. You just had to know where it was going to hunt, and be waiting in the dark when it arrived. The next 3 days passed in a rhythm of instruction and evaluation. Classroom sessions on desert hydration, lectures on navigation by stars and sun, practical exercises in building shelters from nothing. Maya watched, took notes, saw which Marines absorbed the information and which ones thought they already knew everything, saw which ones treated the training like a checklist to complete, and which ones understood they were learning how to stay alive. Shelton was in the second category. Whatever else he was, however much blood stained his hands, the man knew field craft. His shelter building was textbook perfect. His navigation solutions were efficient. His answers during the tactical scenarios showed the kind of thinking that came from real experience, not just classroom theory. It made her hate him more. Because incompetence you could dismiss. Incompetence was just Darwin waiting to happen, but competence in service of cowardice, skill used to cover up betrayal, that was something worse. That was someone who knew better choosing worse. During the second afternoon, Maya conducted individual equipment inspections. Standard procedure before field exercises. Check that everyone had proper gear, that nothing was damaged or missing, that the young Marines who thought they were invincible hadn't decided to leave behind the first aid kit to save weight. She worked through the roster alphabetically, checked packs and canteens and emergency beacons, made notes on her clipboard, professional, thorough, by the book. When she reached Shelton, he had his gear laid out on a table with military precision, every item in its place. Knife sharp, compass calibrated, water purification tablets sealed and dated. Everything appears in order, Staff Sergeant. Wouldn't expect less from someone planning to set the standard. She picked up his emergency beacon, the device that would send a distress signal if activated, bringing immediate extraction and automatic failure of the evaluation. It was heavier than standard issue. This has been modified. Upgraded battery pack, longer transmission range. I like redundancy in my safety equipment. She turned it over in her hands, saw the tamper seal was intact, saw the testing light showed green, put it back down. Noted in the record. Their eyes met. His expression was unreadable. Is there a problem, Lieutenant Commander? No problem, just documenting everything thoroughly. Like you said, I'm thorough. She moved to the next Marine in line. Could feel Shelton watching her back as she worked. Could feel the weight of calculation in his stare. That evening, Maya found the second message. It was tucked into her boot, discovered when she returned to quarters after the day's final briefing. Small piece of paper, folded tight, no envelope this time. She unfolded it carefully, looking for trace evidence, finding none. The message was typed, 3 lines. You should have stayed in Colorado. The desert is where mistakes happen. Ask the families of those 3 SEALs. She read it twice, felt the threat wrapped in each word. The reference to Colorado, to her previous assignment, meant he'd been tracking her movements. The mention of the desert meant he was already planning something for the field evaluation. The reference to the SEALs was meant to remind her what happened to people who got in his way. She photographed the note with her phone, encrypted the image, uploaded it to the same cloud server that held the Syria audio file. Then she burned the paper in the metal trash can and flushed the ashes. 2 messages in 3 days. Shelton was escalating, getting nervous. The ceremony was 5 days away, and the one person who could ruin it was right here, watching him, evaluating him, holding evidence he couldn't destroy. Good. Nervous people made mistakes, and Derek Shelton was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. On the 3rd night, Maya couldn't sleep. Lay on her cot and watched shadows move across the ceiling as vehicles passed outside, their headlights cutting through the thin curtains. Her mind ran scenarios, played out possibilities, calculated odds. Shelton would make his move during the solo evaluation. That was the only time that made sense. Isolated location, no witnesses, plausible deniability built in. Training accidents happened. The desert was dangerous. Even experienced operators died out there sometimes. The question was how. Equipment sabotage was possible but risky. Too many ways that could backfire, too much chance of discovery before the critical moment. Direct confrontation was more likely. He'd approach her observation post, claim navigation error or radio malfunction, get close enough to make it personal. She'd seen him operate in Syria, knew his tactics, knew he preferred solutions that looked like someone else's fault. Her phone buzzed. Another encrypted message, this one from the contact she'd labeled Asset 1. Confirmation, package delivered, ready on your mark. She typed back. Stand by, will signal when ready. then powered down and tried again to sleep. This time it came, but the dreams were waiting. Syria, the rooftop, Marcus Hale looking at her with eyes that understood he was dying. Sarah Chen's last words crackling over the radio. David Park's hand reaching out for help that arrived too late. And behind them all, Shelton's voice. Good luck. She woke at 0400, showered, dressed, made herself ready for Day 4. Day 4 was final equipment checks and mission brief for the solo evaluation. Each Marine was issued standard survival kit. Knife, compass, emergency beacon, 2 quarts of water, basic first aid supplies. No food. No GPS devices beyond the tracker that would let Maya monitor their positions. No radios except for emergency use only. The brief laid out the rules. 72 hours to reach the extraction point. Any route, any method, as long as it didn't involve outside assistance or violation of safety protocols. Activation of the emergency beacon meant automatic failure and immediate extraction. This is not about speed, Maya told them, standing at the front of the briefing room with a topographic map projected behind her. It's about judgment, about knowing when to push and when to rest, when to take the direct route and when to go around. The desert will give you 100 opportunities to make fatal mistakes. My job is to see which of you are smart enough not to take them. Shelton sat in the front row, arms crossed, that perpetual half-smile on his face. What if we encounter other trainees during the exercise? Someone asked. Avoid if possible. Render assistance if necessary. But remember, this is a solo evaluation. Completing someone else's navigation for them isn't doing them any favors. More questions, procedural stuff mostly. Maya answered them with the patience of someone who'd given this brief a dozen times before, but part of her attention never left Shelton, watching him watch her, reading the body language, the confidence, the calculation. He was planning something. She could see it in the way he held himself. The ease, the lack of concern that should have been there for someone about to spend 3 days alone in one of the harshest environments in North America. The brief ended at 1700 hours. Departure was scheduled for 0600 the next morning. First out would be Staff Sergeant Derek Shelton, establishing the baseline performance for everyone who followed. Maya returned to her quarters and began her own preparations. The gear she pulled from her footlocker wasn't standard issue. Civilian-grade GPS unit, encrypted satellite phone, night vision monocular, tactical medical kit that went beyond basic first aid. She packed it all into a small assault pack, checked and rechecked each item, made sure everything was exactly where muscle memory expected it to be. Then she pulled out the USB drive. The audio file was 11 minutes and 43 seconds long. She'd listened to it exactly once, the day after they'd loaded the body bags onto the transport, sitting in a bathroom stall at Ramstein Air Base with headphones on and tears running silent down her face. She hadn't listened to it since. Didn't need to. Every word was carved into her memory, like names on a memorial wall. But tonight she copied it to her phone, encrypted it with a code only 2 people in the world knew, set it to auto-upload to a cloud server if she didn't check in every 12 hours. Insurance. Her phone buzzed, text from Commander Cross. First light departure confirmed, monitor vehicle staged, good hunting. She sent back a single word. Roger. Then she sat on the edge of her cot and thought about the next 72 hours, about what Shelton would try, about how she would respond, about the moment when careful planning would collide with desert reality and someone would make a choice that couldn't be unmade. She thought about Marcus Hale's last words, about Sarah Chen's determination to keep fighting even when the situation was hopeless, about David Park's faith that help was coming, that his teammates wouldn't abandon him. She thought about promises made to the dead. And she thought about justice. Not the kind that came from official channels and review boards and inter-service politics, but the kind that came from documentation and evidence and letting guilty people reveal themselves through their own actions. The kind that lasted. She powered down her phone and tried to sleep. The dream came anyway. It always did before missions. But this time, instead of just watching her friends die, she saw what came after. Saw herself standing over Derek Shelton in a courtroom. Saw the medal being taken away. Saw 3 families finally getting truth instead of lies. Saw justice. She woke at 04:30, showered in water that never got hot, dressed in desert utilities that had seen better days. By 0500, she was in the motor pool checking over the monitoring vehicle. Toyota Land Cruiser, heavily modified, equipped with long-range comms and GPS tracking display. Commander Cross had assigned her a driver, young specialist who looked about 16 and drove like he'd learned on video games. Ever been to the Mojave, specialist? No ma'am, sir, ma'am. He stumbled over the proper address for a naval officer, Lieutenant Commander. It's fine, what's your name? Diaz, ma'am, Specialist Carlos Diaz. Well, Specialist Diaz, the Mojave is going to teach you things about heat and distance that no classroom ever will. Stay hydrated. Don't touch anything that looks like it might bite. And if I tell you to drive somewhere fast, don't ask questions. Yes, ma'am. The helicopter arrived at 0545, a US-60 Blackhawk with Marine markings and a crew chief who looked bored with existence. Shelton showed up at 0550 carrying his issued gear and nothing else. He walked past the monitoring vehicle without looking at Maya, climbed into the helicopter, strapped in. Commander Cross materialized from somewhere, coffee cup in hand, face unreadable. His drop zone is grid reference 34.7 north, 116.2 west. Extraction point is here. He tapped the map display in the Land Cruiser. 43 miles as the crow flies. Smart route is probably closer to 50. And if he doesn't take the smart route? Then we learned something about his judgment. Cross sipped his coffee. Monitor vehicle stays on hard roads only. No direct observation unless emergency beacon activates. He knows the rules. Yes, sir. Lieutenant Commander, Cross's voice dropped. Whatever happens out there, document everything. Timestamp, photograph, record, understood. Understood. The helicopter spooled up, rotors beginning their lazy rotation, building speed and noise until conversation became impossible. Through the window, Maya could see Shelton staring straight ahead, jaw set, hands relaxed on his knees. The skids lifted. The Blackhawk nosed forward and climbed, banking east toward the rising sun and the wasteland beyond. Maya climbed into the passenger seat of the Land Cruiser. Let's go, specialist. Stay a mile behind the flight path. I want to see where they drop him. The vehicle lurched forward, tires crunching on gravel, heading out the main gate into the desert that stretched forever in every direction like an ocean made of dust and broken promises. Somewhere out there, Derek Shelton thought he was about to prove himself. Thought he was going to ace the evaluation, collect his medal, bury the past under a new narrative of heroism and success. What he didn't know was that Maya Corwin had already written the end of this story. She just had to let him write the middle parts first. The parts where he revealed exactly who he was when he thought nobody was watching. The parts that would look very different in an official report than they would sound in a court-martial proceeding. The helicopter was a dark speck against the morning sky now, heading deeper into the Mojave, carrying a man who'd left 3 people to die and expected to be rewarded for it. Maya pulled out her binoculars and watched until the speck disappeared. Then she opened her notebook and began to write. Hour 0. Staff Sergeant Derek Shelton departed for solo evaluation at 0600 hours. Weather clear. Temperature 74 degrees Fahrenheit and rising. Subject appeared calm and confident. She paused, pen hovering over paper. Then added one more line. Let's see how long that lasts. The helicopter touched down at grid reference 34.7 north, 116.2 west at exactly 0617 hours. Through her binoculars, Maya watched the Blackhawk settle into a hover 3 feet off the deck, rotors kicking up a dust storm that turned the morning golden brown. The crew chief leaned out, gave Shelton the signal. Jump or get pushed. Those were the only options once the bird was committed to a hot landing zone. Shelton jumped. He hit the sand in a controlled fall, rolled, came up on one knee with his pack already swinging onto his shoulders. The kind of movement that came from muscle memory, from doing it so many times in so many places that the body didn't need the brain anymore. The Blackhawk lifted immediately, nosed over, hammered away to the west, trailing dust and noise. Then silence. Shelton stood alone in a landscape that looked like God had run out of ideas halfway through creation. Flat hardpan stretching to low ridges in the east, scattered creosote bush providing the only vertical relief, heat already building even though the sun was barely clearing the horizon. 43 miles to the extraction point. 72 hours to get there. Water for maybe 36 if he was smart about it. Maya lowered the binoculars and checked the GPS display mounted in the Land Cruiser's dashboard. Shelton's tracker showed as a blue dot at the drop zone, stationary, probably getting his bearings and checking his gear. Standard procedure. You didn't just start walking in the desert. You planned, you calculated, you made sure your first steps were in the right direction because out here wrong directions killed you. Where to, ma'am? Specialist Diaz had both hands on the wheel, engine idling, waiting for orders. Head to the observation point. Ridge line 3 miles north of his position. Should give us line of sight for the first few hours of his movement. The Land Cruiser lurched forward, suspension protesting as they left what passed for a road and started navigating between rocks and dried vegetation. The GPS dot didn't move for another 6 minutes. Then it started tracking east by southeast, steady pace, following what looked like an old game trail or maybe just a natural depression in the terrain where walking was easier. Smart. Maya opened her notebook and made the first entry. 0623. Subject begins movement toward extraction point. Route selection indicates familiarity with terrain features and efficient navigation principles. Pace approximately 3 miles per hour. She looked up from the notebook and watched the empty desert roll past the window. Somewhere out there, Derek Shelton was walking into what he thought was a solo survival evaluation. What he didn't know was that he'd stopped being alone the moment the helicopter lifted. The ridge line gave them a view of maybe 10 square miles of wasteland. Maya set up the observation post with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 100 times before. Spotting scope on a tripod, GPS display angled to avoid glare, satellite phone within arm's reach, rifle case open. But the weapon still secured because this was observation only and pulling a rifle made it something else. Diaz stayed with the vehicle, which was smart because shade was going to be a luxury in about 2 hours when the temperature climbed past 90. Through the scope she found Shelton. He'd made good progress, already 3 miles from the drop zone, moving with that measured pace that ate distance without burning energy. He stopped once to drink from his canteen, just a single swallow, wetting his mouth but not wasting water. By the book. Her phone vibrated. Text message from Commander Cross. Status. She typed back. On schedule, subject performing to standard. The reply came fast. Maintain observation. Report any deviations. She powered the phone down and went back to the scope. Shelton walked for another hour, then stopped in the shadow of a rock formation that rose maybe 15 feet above the desert floor. Smart again, taking advantage of shade during the hottest part of the morning, letting his core temperature stabilize before pushing into the real heat of midday. He sat with his back to the rock, took another small sip of water, appeared to be checking his compass and map. That's when Maya saw the second figure. It came from the west, moving fast, using the terrain for cover, not trying to hide exactly but not advertising either. The gait was wrong for a casual hiker. Too purposeful, too tactical, and out here, 40 miles from the nearest road and 20 from the training area boundary, there shouldn't be anyone. She adjusted the scope's focus and felt her jaw tighten. Marine Corps utilities. Assault pack. No weapon visible but moving like someone who knew how to use one. The figure covered the last 200 yards in a crouch, using a dry wash for concealment, and came up behind Shelton's position. Maya grabbed her camera with the telephoto lens and started shooting. Click. Unknown individual approaching Shelton's location. Click. Figure emerging from dry wash, marine uniform visible. Click. Shelton standing, no surprise on his face, greeting someone he'd been expecting. She zoomed in tighter, maxing out the lens, trying to get identifying details. The range was long, maybe 400 yards, but the optics were good. Through the viewfinder she could make out rank insignia. Corporal chevrons. Young, maybe mid-20s. Build suggested regular PT but not special operations lean. Face partially obscured by the angle and distance. Click, the two of them talking, close enough that shoulders almost touched. Click, Shelton pulling something from his pack, small and rectangular, looked like a radio. Click, the unknown Marine taking the device, checking it, nodding. This was planned. Shelton had never intended to do a solo evaluation. He'd set up a rendezvous before the exercise even started, which meant he'd been planning something that required backup, required secrecy, required violating the most basic rule of the training he was supposed to be completing. She kept shooting. The camera's memory card could hold thousands of images. She intended to fill it. They talked for another 3 minutes. Then the unknown Marine pointed north, toward the ridge line where Maya sat hidden behind rock and scrub brush. Toward her observation post. She went absolutely still, didn't move the camera, didn't adjust her position, just watched through the lens as Shelton turned to look in her direction. He couldn't see her. The ridge was too far, the concealment too good, the angle wrong for spotting someone who didn't want to be spotted. But he was looking, which meant he knew she was supposed to be here, knew the observation post protocol, was planning for it. The unknown Marine clapped Shelton on the shoulder and moved off, heading back the way he'd come, using the same dry wash for cover. Maya kept the camera on him, shooting continuously, getting every angle she could. The Marine reached a point about 600 yards out where a black Chevy pickup was parked in the shadow of a larger rock formation. Climbed in, started the engine. Maya zoomed in on the truck's license plate. Nevada tags. She memorized the number, wrote it in her notebook, kept shooting as the vehicle pulled away heading northwest. Then she immediately pulled out her tablet, the ruggedized military-issue device she used for official documentation. Pulled up the training roster for the Force Recon cycle. 23 Marines total. She'd photographed all of them during the initial briefing for her records. Started comparing faces. Scrolled through the roster. Not him, not him, not him. There. Corporal Marcus Briggs, age 32, 8 years in the Corps, Force Recon qualified, home of record Phoenix, Arizona, emergency contact, wife and 2 daughters. She pulled up the photo she'd taken during the briefing, compared it to the telephoto shots from the desert. Same build, same height relative to Shelton, same way of standing with weight on the left foot. Positive identification. She made the notation in her records. 0845. Subject met with Corporal Marcus Briggs from training roster. Duration of contact approximately 4 minutes. Exchange of equipment observed appears to be communication device. Briggs departed northwest in black Chevy pickup, Nevada plates. GPS coordinates of meeting site documented. Photographic evidence secured. She took the memory card out of the camera, sealed it in a waterproof bag, and secured it in an inside pocket. Insurance policy number 2. Then she pulled out her own encrypted radio, not the official monitoring channel but the other one, the frequency that didn't appear on any training documentation. Overwatch, this is Observer, you copy. The response came back clean despite the distance. Observer, Overwatch, send traffic. Subject has made unauthorized contact with Corporal Marcus Briggs from the training roster. Exchanged equipment, possibly radio. Briggs now moving northwest from subject position in black Chevy pickup. Can you acquire the vehicle? A pause, sound of someone checking displays, running calculations. Negative visual, too much terrain. But we've got his vehicle tagged from the motor pool exit this morning. Black Chevy, Nevada plates match your description. We'll track if he moves within range of our sensors. Copy, continue monitoring, observer out. She clipped the radio back to her belt and returned to the scope. Shelton was on the move again, pack settled, pace steady, heading east like nothing had happened. Like he was just another Marine doing what Marines do, walking through bad terrain toward a goal only he could see. But Maya had seen, had documented, had proof that this wasn't a solo evaluation anymore. The question was what Shelton and Briggs were planning. And the answer, she suspected, involved making sure she didn't leave the desert alive. The temperature hit 103 degrees at noon, the kind of heat that made air shimmer and turned the horizon into a liquid mirage, distances becoming suggestions rather than facts. Maya sat in what shade the ridge provided and watched Shelton cover ground. He was good. She had to give him that. Stopped every 90 minutes for exactly 3 minutes, drank sparingly, adjusted his course to take advantage of what little cover the desert offered. By 1400 hours, he'd covered 12 miles. Solid pace. He'd reached the extraction point with time to spare at this rate. That's when he changed direction. Instead of continuing east toward the objective, he angled north. Not a dramatic shift, just 10 or 15 degrees, but enough. Enough to take him away from the extraction point. Enough to point him toward the secondary ridge line where the observation protocol said Maya would be repositioning around this time. Toward her. She zoomed the scope in tighter, watching his face. The expression was neutral, focused, the look of someone navigating by landmarks. But there was something else, a tension around the eyes, a set to the jaw. He knew where she'd be, was heading there deliberately. She keyed the radio again. Overwatch, observer. Subject has deviated from optimal route. Now tracking north by northeast, direct line toward my current position. Acknowledged, recommend you relocate. Negative, I want to see what he does. Observer, that puts you at risk. Noted, maintaining position. Out. She moved back from the ridge crest, deeper into the rocks, found a position where she could watch the approach route without being silhouetted. The rifle came out of its case now. Not pointed at anything, not loaded, just present. Just in case present turned into necessary. Shelton arrived 90 minutes later. She heard him before she saw him, boots crunching on loose stone, breathing steady despite the heat and the distance. He came up the back side of the ridge, taking the easier route, and stopped maybe 40 yards from where Maya crouched behind a boulder the size of a refrigerator. He looked around. Systematic scan, eyes tracking left to right and back again, looking for something, looking for her. When he didn't find what he wanted, he pulled out his canteen and took a long drink. Then he pulled out the radio Briggs had given him and keyed the transmit button twice. 2 clicks, nothing more. Somewhere out in the desert, someone heard those clicks and understood their meaning. Maya's hand tightened on the grip of her rifle. Shelton set down his pack, pulled out what looked like a standard issue poncho, and started rigging it as a sun shelter between 2 rocks, making camp, setting up like he planned to be here for a while. She checked her watch. 15-30 hours, still plenty of daylight left. No reason to stop here unless stopping here served a purpose. The waiting began. An hour passed, then 2. The sun tracked west, shadows lengthening, temperature dropping from unbearable to merely miserable. Shelton sat in his improvised shelter and didn't move. Just sat there like a man with all the time in the world and nothing but patience to spend it on. Maya understood that patience, had used it herself in hides that lasted days, waiting for a target to make a mistake, to step into the open, to give her the shot she needed. But she'd been the hunter in those situations. Out here, she wasn't sure which role she was playing anymore. The sun was an hour from the horizon when she heard the vehicle. Diesel engine, coming from the west, moving fast enough to kick up dust but not so fast that it would tear the suspension apart on the rough terrain. She swung the scope toward the sound and picked up the black Chevy pickup, the same one from this morning, bouncing over hardpan toward Shelton's position. It stopped 50 yards from the ridge. Briggs got out of the driver's side, and from the passenger side came someone Maya recognized from the training roster. Young, maybe 24, corporal's chevrons, nervous energy in every movement. Corporal James Vaughn, the newbie who'd asked questions during the briefing. 3 of them now. Maya's hand moved to her phone, started recording video. Whatever happened next, she wanted it documented. Wanted every second preserved for the moment when Derek Shelton stood in front of people who mattered and tried to explain this away. Shelton came down from the ridge to meet them. No handshakes, no greeting. Just Briggs talking fast, gesturing, while Vaughn hung back looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the shapes. Could see Briggs pointing back toward the training area, toward the route they should have taken. Could see Shelton shaking his head, pointing up at the ridge, at her position. They were talking about her. Briggs pulled out a map, spread it on the hood of the truck. The 3 of them huddled over it, planning, plotting, deciding something that required a map and privacy, and 3 men who had no business being together during what was supposed to be a solo training evaluation. Maya zoomed the camera in tight and kept recording. 5 minutes of conversation. Then Briggs and Vaughn got back in the truck and drove away, heading west, dust plume marking their passage until distance swallowed them. Shelton watched them go. Then he turned and looked directly at the spot where Maya was hidden. He couldn't see her. The light was wrong, the concealment too good, the distance enough that even if he had binoculars, he wouldn't pick out the shape of a person from the shapes of rocks and brush. But he was looking. And the expression on his face was the same one she'd seen in Syria, right before he'd made the call that killed 3 people. Cold, calculated, the look of someone who'd already decided what had to happen and was just waiting for the right moment to make it real. She lowered the camera and keyed the radio to the encrypted channel. Overwatch observer. I need immediate relay to Commander Cross. Priority traffic. Stand by. 30 seconds of static, then Cross's voice, rougher than usual, like she'd pulled him out of something important. This is Cross, go ahead. Sir, subject has made contact with 2 additional personnel, confirmed as Corporal Briggs and Corporal Vaughn from training roster. They delivered equipment to subject and engaged in what appeared to be tactical planning. Vehicle has departed, but subject remains at position approximately 400 yards from my observation post. Silence on the other end, long enough that she thought the connection had dropped. Then, Lieutenant Commander, what is your assessment of the situation? She watched Shelton through the scope, watched him pull out his canteen and take another drink, watched him settle back into his shelter like a man with a plan and the patience to see it through. Sir, I assess that Staff Sergeant Shelton is not conducting a solo survival evaluation. He's conducting a reconnaissance of my position with intent to. She paused, choosing words carefully. With intent to create a situation that would require my intervention or evacuation. Spell it out, Lieutenant. He's hunting me, sir. Another pause, shorter this time. Can you relocate without being observed? She scanned the terrain. The ridge offered maybe 3 routes down, all of them exposed once you committed, all of them visible from Shelton's position. She could wait for full dark, another 2 hours, move then. But 2 hours was a long time to sit in one place when someone knew approximately where you were. Negative, sir, not without exposing my position. Then I'm authorizing emergency extraction. Helicopter is 30 minutes out. Can you hold position until then? She thought about Syria, about sitting on that rooftop while the radio crackled with Shelton's voice telling her good luck, about carrying bodies downstairs slick with blood while Marines who could have helped drove away to safety. Sir, request permission to remain in field. I want to see what he does. Absolutely not. This has gone beyond training evaluation. I'm pulling you out. Commander, if you extract me now, all we have is protocol violations. Unauthorized contact with other personnel. Deviation from approved route. That gets him a failure grade and maybe some paperwork. But if we let this play out, if we document what he's actually planning. She let the implication hang in the air like gun smoke. Cross's voice went quiet, the kind of quiet that came before important decisions. You're talking about letting him attempt assault on a superior officer. I'm talking about giving him enough rope to hang himself, sir, same as Syria. Let him make the choice. Let him commit to the action. Then we have him. And if something goes wrong, if he's better at this than you're giving him credit for. Maya ejected the magazine from her rifle, checked the rounds, seated it back with a click that sounded loud in the desert silence. Sir, I've spent 18 months waiting for Derek Shelton to be held accountable for what he did. If he wants to add attempted murder of a Navy SEAL to his list of accomplishments, I'm willing to be the bait. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, 15, 20. Then you have until 0600 tomorrow. If I don't hear from you by then, I'm sending every asset I have to pull you out and put Shelton in restraints. Understood? Understood, sir. And Lieutenant Commander, don't do anything stupid. Define stupid, sir. Anything that gets you killed before you can testify. Roger that, observer out. She clipped the radio back to her belt and returned to watching Shelton through the scope. He'd moved, was standing now shading his eyes, looking toward the ridge, looking toward her. She smiled. Come on then, she thought. Come find out what happens when you hunt something that knows how to hunt back. The sun touched the horizon at 1847 hours. Light went golden, then orange, then the deep red that came before darkness swallowed everything. Maya used the changing light to reposition, moving back from the ridge crest to a secondary position 40 yards north, a cluster of rocks that formed a natural fortification. Good sight lines on the approach routes. Clear exit to the north if things went bad. High ground advantage. Shelton would come at night. She was sure of it. Daytime was for observation, for planning, for getting the terrain locked in your head. But the actual move, the commitment, that happened in darkness when vision was limited and sounds got confused and the person you were hunting couldn't see you coming. She settled in to wait. The desert transformed after sunset. Temperature plummeting from 100 plus to 60 in less than 2 hours. The kind of cold that got into your bones after a day of baking heat, made you shiver even though logically you knew it wasn't that cold. Your body just couldn't regulate anymore. Maya pulled on a light jacket and made herself small in the rocks. Above her, stars emerged. Thousands of them, millions, the kind of sky you only got 100 miles from the nearest city. She'd learned navigation by these stars in training, could pick out Polaris and Orion and the Southern Cross, could tell time by their positions and direction by their movement. But tonight she wasn't navigating. She was hunting. Movement came at 22:15 hours. Just a shadow against shadows, low to the ground, using the terrain the way someone trained would use it. Coming up the south face of the ridge, the route she'd taken earlier, following her tracks probably, confident in darkness and skill and the element of surprise. Maya tracked the movement through her night vision monocular. The device turned darkness into shades of green, made shadows into shapes, revealed Derek Shelton crawling on his belly through rocks and brush with the patience of a sniper approaching a hide. He had a knife. She could see it strapped to his thigh. No gun visible, but that didn't mean he wasn't carrying. The way he moved suggested someone who'd done this before. Combat crawl, perfect noise discipline, stopping every few feet to listen and observe. He reached her original position, the spot where she'd been watching from until an hour ago. Swept it with his own night vision, probably saw the disturbed ground where she'd set up the tripod, the crushed vegetation where she'd lain prone. She could see him processing it, working out that she'd moved, trying to figure out where. He keyed his radio twice, 2 clicks, same signal as before. Then he started searching. Systematic pattern, working outward from her old position in a spiral, checking likely hide sites. He was 40 yards away when he found the secondary position, the rocks where she'd moved to. And realized it was empty too. She watched him freeze. Watched him go absolutely still in that way operators did when they suddenly realized they'd made a mistake. When the equation they'd been working in their head came up with the wrong answer. Maya stood up from her position behind him and to the left, 20 yards away, rifle not quite pointed at him but not quite pointed away either. Evening Staff Sergeant. He spun, faster than she expected, hand going to the knife at his thigh. Then he saw the rifle and went still again. Lieutenant Commander. His voice was steady, no surprise in it, like he'd been expecting this. Didn't expect to run into you out here. No, because I've been watching you make a direct line toward my observation post for the last 6 hours. Watched you meet with Briggs and Vaughn. Watched you set up in a position with line of sight to my last location. All things that suggest you expected to run into me very much. He straightened up slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. The smile came back, that same easy confidence. I took a wrong turn. Navigation error happens to everyone. You're a Force Recon Marine with 15 years experience. You don't take wrong turns. Even the best get turned around sometimes. She shifted her stance slightly, rifle coming up just enough that the muzzle was pointed at center mass instead of the ground. Not aiming. Not yet. Just ready. Why are you here, Shelton? Training evaluation, same as you. You're supposed to be at grid reference 42 East. You're 12 miles off course. You've made unauthorized contact with 2 other Marines. You've deviated from every protocol in the training manual. So I'll ask again. Why are you here? The smile faded. Something else moved behind his eyes, something colder. Maybe I wanted to talk. Clear the air about Syria, about your report, about the fact that you've been carrying a grudge for 18 months when what happened was a tactical decision made under fire. 3 people died. 3 people died because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I saved my Marines. That's what leaders do. Leaders don't abandon teammates. We weren't teammates, Lieutenant Commander. We were never on the same team. He took a step forward, just one, testing. Maya's finger moved to the trigger guard. Not on the trigger, not yet. Stop moving. He stopped, but the smile came back, meaner now. You going to shoot me? Unarmed trainee during a training exercise. That'll look great in your next report. Real professional. You have a knife. For survival purposes, standard issue. You approached my position after dark using tactical movement. You coordinated with outside personnel in violation of solo evaluation protocols. You changed course to intersect with my location despite having no legitimate reason to be here. She paused. That's not training. That's stalking. Prove it. She pulled the camera from her pocket with her left hand, rifle steady in her right, and held it up so he could see. Already did. Got about 200 photos of you and Briggs and Vaughn having a planning session. Got video of your approach tonight. Got GPS logs showing every step of your deviation. Commander Cross has copies of everything. So when they ask me why I felt threatened enough to pull a weapon on you, I'll have documentation going back 6 hours. His jaw tightened. The casual confidence cracked just slightly. You've been busy. I learned from the best. You taught me that evidence matters, that official records are what count, that the person who controls the narrative controls the outcome. She lowered the camera but kept the rifle ready. Thanks for the lesson. They stood facing each other across 20 yards of rock and sand and 18 months of unfinished business. The desert wind picked up, carrying the smell of creosote and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, long and mournful. Shelton's hand drifted toward his knife again. I wouldn't, Maya said quietly. You won't shoot. You willing to bet your life on that assessment? He was. She could see it in his posture, the way his weight shifted forward, the calculations running behind his eyes. Distance versus reaction time. Cover versus exposure. His knife versus her rifle. The math didn't work in his favor, and somewhere deep down he knew it. But pride was a hell of a drug, and Derek Shelton had been high on it for 18 months. His hand closed on the knife handle. Maya's finger moved to the trigger. Last warning, Staff Sergeant. He froze, not because of the warning, because of the sound. Helicopter rotors, distant but getting closer. The distinctive thump of a I-60 Blackhawk moving fast and low. Maya keyed her radio, without looking away from Shelton. Overwatch observer, sitrep on inbound air. That's Commander Cross with security team. He decided not to wait for 0600. Copy. She looked at Shelton and saw the moment he understood, saw the anger and frustration and fear all blend together into the expression of someone who just watched their plan collapse. "It's over," she said. "You came out here to do what? Scare me, hurt me, make it look like a training accident. Doesn't matter, you're done. You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've known since Syria. The only question was whether you'd prove me right or prove me wrong. Thanks for picking the option that comes with a court-martial." The helicopter was close now, searchlights stabbing down through the darkness, painting the desert in harsh white light. It settled into a hover 50 yards away, downdraft kicking up a dust storm, and armed Marines fast roped down with the efficiency of people who did this professionally. Shelton looked at them, then at Maya, then at the knife still in his hand. "Drop it," she said, "now." He did. The blade hit stone with a metallic ring that got swallowed by rotor noise. Two Marines approached with weapons ready, not quite pointing them at Shelton but ready to if he made it necessary. The senior one, a staff sergeant with more ribbons than empty chest space, looked at Maya. "You okay, ma'am?" "I'm fine, he's all yours." They took Shelton's arms, patted him down, found a radio and a GPS unit that shouldn't have been in his possession. Standard restraint procedure. By the book. Professional. Shelton didn't resist, just stood there with his hands being zip-tied behind his back, staring at Maya with an expression that could have melted steel. "This isn't over," he said. "Yeah, it is." Commander Cross climbed out of the helicopter and walked over, dust settling around him, face hard as granite. "Staff Sergeant Derek Shelton, you are hereby relieved of all training responsibilities and placed under investigation for violation of training protocols, unauthorized coordination with other personnel during solo evaluation, and," he paused, looked at Maya. "What am I missing, Lieutenant Commander?" "Attempted assault on a superior officer, sir. He approached my position after dark with a bladed weapon and intent to cause harm." "Can you prove intent?" She held up the camera. "Yes, sir, I can prove everything." Cross nodded once, sharp and final. "Take him back to base. Secure holding. No contact with anyone until I say otherwise." The Marines walked Shelton toward the helicopter. He looked back once, caught Maya's eyes, tried for one last bit of intimidation. She smiled at him. The kind of smile that said checkmate. The helicopter lifted with Shelton aboard, searchlight sweeping one more time across the ridge before it angled away toward Fort Mackenzie. The sound faded. The dust settled. The desert returned to silence. Cross stood beside Maya and watched the lights disappear. "You took a hell of a risk staying out here." "Calculated risk, sir. Could have gone wrong 100 different ways. But it didn't." He pulled a canteen from his belt and offered it to her. She took it, drank, realized how thirsty she'd been. "The photos and video," Cross said, "they show everything. Everything that matters. The meeting with Briggs and Vaughn, the equipment transfer, his approach tonight. All time stamped, all documented. And the knife. He drew it. I gave verbal commands to drop it. He didn't comply until your security team arrived, all of which I'll include in my written report." Cross took the canteen back and drank himself. "You know what this means. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, prison time possibly. His career is finished." "Good." "The medal ceremony gets canceled or postponed pending investigation. Either way, he doesn't get to stand on that stage and accept recognition for something he didn't do. They stood in silence for a moment. Above them, stars wheeled in their eternal patterns, uncaring about human drama played out beneath them. "What about Syria?" Cross asked quietly. "The after-action report you wrote, the one that got buried." Maya pulled the USB drive from her pocket and held it up in the starlight. "I kept a copy, against regulations, against orders, but I kept it. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to hand it to the Inspector General along with 18 months of documentation showing a pattern of behavior. Shelton abandoning teammates in Syria. Shelton fabricating medal citations. Shelton stalking and attempting to assault a superior officer who witnessed his original misconduct." She closed her fist around the drive. "The Navy wanted this to go away, but the Navy doesn't get to make that call anymore." Cross smiled. It was a terrible smile, the kind that promised consequences. "I'll make sure it gets to the right people." A second helicopter arrived 10 minutes later, this one to extract Maya and her gear. She packed up the observation post methodically, made sure nothing was left behind, checked and double-checked that the camera's memory card was secure in her pocket. The flight back to Fort McKenzie took 20 minutes. They flew low, following terrain, and through the window Maya could see the desert spreading out below like a map of every hard thing she'd ever had to do, every mission that went wrong, every teammate who didn't come home, every promise made to the dead that the living would remember them. Tomorrow she'd write the report. The day after, she'd start the formal process of bringing charges. A week from now, Derek Shelton would be sitting in front of investigators trying to explain why he'd thrown away his career for a medal he didn't earn. But tonight, flying through darkness toward lights on the horizon, she allowed herself a moment of something that almost felt like satisfaction. They landed at 01:15 hours. The parade ground was empty, lights burning in scattered buildings where people worked night shifts or couldn't sleep, or were dealing with whatever crisis needed dealing with at 1 in the morning. Cross walked her to the headquarters building. "Get some rest. We'll start formal proceedings at 0800. You'll need to give a complete statement." "Yes, sir." "And Lieutenant Commander." She stopped at the door. "You did good work tonight. Textbook documentation. By the time this goes to court-martial, Shelton won't have anywhere to hide." "Thank you, sir." She went to her quarters, stripped off her gear, stood under a shower that never got quite hot enough but washed away the dust and sweat, and the feeling of being watched by someone with bad intentions. When she was clean, she sat on her cot in the dark and pulled out her phone. 3 messages waited. The first was from a number she didn't recognize. "Heard you had an interesting night. Glad you're safe." The second was from the same unknown sender. "The photos are perfect. The video is devastating. He's done." The third made her smile. "By the way, this is Vaughn. Briggs gave me your number. He wanted me to tell you he's ready to testify about tonight, about Syria, about all of it. We both are." She typed back, "Thank you, see you at the hearing." Then she powered the phone down and lay back on the cot. Sleep should have come easy. She'd been awake for 20 hours, physically exhausted, emotionally drained. But her mind wouldn't stop running the scenarios, replaying the confrontation, thinking about all the ways it could have gone different. She was still awake when dawn started lightening the eastern sky. Somewhere on this base, Derek Shelton sat in a holding cell and contemplated the wreckage of his career. Somewhere in Virginia, 3 families were about to learn that the man who'd been recommended for a medal while their loved ones died was finally going to be held accountable. And somewhere in Syria, In a cemetery where fallen seals rested under white marble, Marcus Hale and Sarah Chen and David Park could rest a little easier knowing that the truth was coming. Maya got up, dressed in fresh utilities, pinned on her rank and her trident, and walked out into the morning to write the report that would end Derek Shelton's military career and maybe, finally, bring some justice for the people he'd left behind. The sun rose over Fort McKenzie, painting the desert gold and red. It was going to be a good day. The hearing room at Fort Bragg smelled like floor polish and the kind of tension that came when careers hung in the balance. Maya sat in the witness chair, hands folded on the table in front of her, uniform pressed to regulation perfection, eyes forward. Across from her, 3 officers formed the investigation board. Colonel Sarah Martinez in the center, flanked by Lieutenant Colonel James Reeves and Major Patricia Chen, all of them wearing expressions that gave away nothing. Behind her in the gallery sat maybe 30 people, command staff, JAG officers, a handful of Marines whose presence suggested they had something to say when their turn came, and in the back corner, almost invisible in his dress blues, Corporal James Vaughn. He caught her eye once, nodded slightly, looked away. The questioning had been going on for 2 hours, detail by detail, moment by moment, walking through everything that happened from the initial briefing at Fort McKenzie to the confrontation on the ridge. Maya answered each question with the same precise clarity she used writing after action reports. Facts, observations, documentation. Colonel Martinez leaned back in her chair and studied the array of photographs spread across the table. Images of Shelton meeting with Briggs. Video stills showing the approach at night. The knife lying on the ground where he dropped it. Lieutenant Commander Corwin, in your professional assessment, what was Staff Sergeant Shelton's intent when he approached your observation post after dark? Maya didn't hesitate. To cause me harm, ma'am. Potentially lethal harm disguised as a training accident. That's a serious allegation. Yes, ma'am. Can you support it with more than speculation? Maya reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside were printed transcripts, radio logs, GPS coordinates plotted on maps with timestamps. Ma'am, the evidence shows a pattern. Staff Sergeant Shelton coordinated with 2 other Marines in violation of solo evaluation protocols. He deviated 12 miles from his assigned route to intersect with my position. He approached after dark using tactical movement consistent with hostile action. When confronted, he reached for a bladed weapon despite verbal commands to stop. She paused. This wasn't navigation error. It was planned, coordinated, and executed with intent. Intent to do what specifically? To eliminate the one witness who could contradict his Medal of Valor citation. The same witness who filed an after-action report 18 months ago documenting his abandonment of SEAL team members in Syria. The room went very quiet. Major Chen spoke for the first time, voice careful. You're saying Staff Sergeant Shelton attempted to murder you to protect a false medal citation. I'm saying the evidence supports that conclusion, ma'am. The rest is for this board to decide. Martinez picked up one of the photos. Shelton and Briggs conferring over a map on the hood of the truck. You documented everything. Yes, ma'am. I was taught that evidence matters, that official records determine outcomes. Staff Sergeant Shelton taught me that actually, in Syria. Something that might have been a smile flickered across Martinez's face and disappeared. We've reviewed your original after-action report from Operation Copper Fang, the unedited version, along with radio communications you preserved in violation of security protocols. Maya felt her stomach tighten. The USB drive. Cross had promised to get it to the right people, but she hadn't known it would surface here now, in front of a board that could charge her for keeping classified material. "Ma'am, I take full responsibility for that violation. At the time, I believed the official investigation was being compromised by inter-service politics. I kept the recording as insurance that the truth would eventually come to light. The truth being that 3 Navy SEALs died because Staff Sergeant Shelton prioritized his Marines over a joint operation, that he abandoned teammates under fire, and that he then fabricated a narrative of heroism to cover his decision." Lieutenant Colonel Reeves leaned forward. He was older, maybe 60, with the kind of weathered face that came from 30 years of making hard calls. "Lieutenant Commander, let me be very clear. What you're describing is conduct unbecoming, dereliction of duty, and potentially criminal negligence resulting in death. Those are career-ending charges. They're also very difficult to prove 18 months after the fact. Sir, I have radio communications showing Staff Sergeant Shelton was ordered to provide covering fire and refused. I have sworn testimony from Corporal Vaughn regarding the events at Fort McKenzie. I have photographic evidence of protocol violations and conspiracy to commit assault. And I have 3 families in Virginia who deserve to know the truth about how their loved ones died." The room fell silent again. Martinez shuffled papers, found what she was looking for, read it twice. "This board's mandate is to investigate the incidents at Fort McKenzie. The Syria matter falls under separate jurisdiction. However," she looked up, met Maya's eyes. "However, we can make recommendations to the appropriate authorities regarding conduct that demonstrates a pattern of behavior relevant to current charges." "I understand, ma'am." The Medal of Valor ceremony is scheduled for 1400 hours today. As of this moment, it has not been canceled or postponed. Staff Sergeant Shelton is confined to barracks pending the outcome of this hearing, but technically, he remains eligible for the award unless and until formal charges are filed. Maya's jaw tightened. After everything, after documentation and evidence and 2 Marines willing to testify, after 18 months of carrying the weight of 3 deaths, the ceremony was still happening. Martinez saw the reaction and continued. "However, ceremony protocol requires a final verification phase. During this phase, any witness with relevant testimony regarding the cited action may come forward. This board is recommending that you be present for that verification, not as an observer, as a witness." Understanding dawned slowly. Maya looked at Martinez and saw something in the colonel's expression that hadn't been there before. Not quite approval, not quite conspiracy, just the look of one professional to another saying sometimes the system works if you know how to work the system. "Yes, ma'am, I'll be there." "Dismissed, Lieutenant Commander. The board will reconvene at 1600 hours to deliver findings. Don't be late." Maya stood, saluted, turned to leave. She was halfway to the door when Martinez spoke again. "Lieutenant Commander." She stopped. "Those 3 SEALs who died in Syria, Petty Officer Hale, Chief Chen, Lieutenant Park, they would have been proud of how you carried them home, and they'd be proud of what you're doing now." Maya's throat tightened. She managed a nod, couldn't trust her voice, and walked out into the hallway where the morning sun streamed through windows and painted everything gold. The parade ground at Fort Bragg stretched like a parade ground should, perfectly manicured grass leading to a raised platform where flags hung limp in the still air. Bleachers had been set up for spectators. Media was present, cameras on tripods, reporters checking microphones. This was the kind of ceremony that made news. Medal of Valor, heroism under fire, the narrative of American military excellence. Maya arrived at 1330 hours, early enough to see the setup, late enough that most of the seats were already filled. She wore her dress whites, the uniform she saved for occasions that mattered, every ribbon in its proper place. Her seal trident catching light. The Navy Cross she'd earned in Afghanistan positioned above her left breast pocket, a reminder that she knew what real valor looked like. She found a seat in the third row, aisle position, where she could see everything and be seen by anyone looking. The crowd filled in around her. Senior officers, enlisted personnel, civilians who might have been family or press or just people who wanted to watch history happen. She recognized a few faces from the investigation board. Saw Corporal Vaughn sitting alone near the back, looking like he wanted to disappear into the bleachers. At 13:55, the official party emerged from the headquarters building. General Robert McKinley, the post commander, a man in his early 60s who'd earned his stars in Iraq and never let anyone forget it. Behind him came Staff Sergeant Shelton in dress blues that looked like they'd been tailored specifically for this moment. Every ribbon aligned, every brass button polished, chest out, shoulders back, the walk of a man who believed he deserved everything about to happen. He saw Maya as he climbed the steps to the platform. Their eyes met for maybe 2 seconds. She saw calculation there, saw him trying to figure out what her presence meant, whether she was here to watch or to act. She gave him nothing, just sat there with her hands folded in her lap and her face absolutely neutral. The ceremony began with the national anthem. Everyone stood, hands over hearts, the flag snapping once in a breeze that came from nowhere and disappeared just as fast. When the last note faded, General McKinley stepped to the podium. His voice carried across the parade ground without amplification, the kind of command presence that came from decades of making people listen. We are gathered here today to honor extraordinary courage, to recognize actions that exemplify the highest traditions of military service, to present the Medal of Valor to a Marine who, under the most difficult circumstances imaginable, placed the lives of his fellow service members above his own safety. Maya felt something twist in her chest, heard the words and knew how wrong they were, knew that truth and narrative were about to collide in a way that would leave wreckage. McKinley continued, reading from the citation. On the night of April 17th, in the city of Al-Hasaka, Syria, during a joint operation to extract high-value intelligence assets, Staff Sergeant Shelton demonstrated extraordinary heroism. When SEAL team elements came under intense enemy fire, Staff Sergeant Shelton voluntarily exposed himself to hostile action to provide covering fire, enabling the evacuation of 3 wounded SEALs while personally engaging enemy positions with rifle and grenade. Every word was a lie. Every sentence was fiction wrapped in official language. Despite being wounded himself, Staff Sergeant Shelton maintained his position for 17 minutes, expending all ammunition before conducting a tactical withdrawal under fire. His actions directly resulted in the successful extraction of coalition forces and prevented further casualties. Maya's hands tightened in her lap, felt her breathing go shallow, counted to 10 the way they'd taught her in survival training when panic tried to override discipline. McKinley reached for the metal case sitting on the podium, blue velvet box, gold medal inside catching sunlight. Before I present this award, protocol requires me to ask, does anyone present have testimony regarding this action? Standard ceremony language, the kind of thing that got asked at weddings and awards and formal proceedings. Expected answer was silence. Expected response was to proceed with the recognition. Maya stood. The movement was slow, deliberate, impossible to miss. Every head in the bleachers turned. McKinley looked up from the metal case, expression shifting from ceremonial warmth to confusion. Yes, you have something to add. Maya stepped into the aisle, walked toward the platform. Her boots made solid sounds on the concrete path, measured, even, the walk of someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't be turned aside. General McKinley, sir. I have testimony regarding the events of April 17th in Syria. McKinley's eyes flicked to Shelton, then back to Maya. He saw her rank insignia, her ribbons put pieces together. You were present during the operation. Yes, sir. I was SEAL team leader for the extraction element. I was on the rooftop calling for covering fire when Staff Sergeant Shelton made the decision that got 3 of my teammates killed. The parade ground went absolutely silent. Even the wind stopped. 200 people holding their breath, cameras swiveling to capture what happened next. Shelton's face went white, then red, then something beyond color into pure fury. General, this is inappropriate. Lieutenant Commander Corwin has a personal grudge. She's been trying to undermine my career since Syria. Her testimony is biased and irrelevant. McKinley held up one hand. Command gesture, everyone shut up. Lieutenant Commander, that's a serious allegation. Can you support it? Maya reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small device, digital audio recorder. She held it up so everyone could see. Sir, this contains radio communications from the night of April 17th, unedited, time-stamped, including the moment I requested covering fire and Staff Sergeant Shelton refused. She pressed play. Her own voice came first, younger sounding, stressed but controlled. Viper 6, this is SEAL Team Alpha, taking heavy fire from 3 positions. 2 wounded, 1 critical. Request immediate covering fire, grid 3-4.7, danger close. Static, then Shelton's voice, calm as if discussing weather. Negative Alpha, extracting my element first. Recommend you find alternate egress. Good luck. More static, then another voice. Petty Officer Marcus Hale, the friend who'd mentored Maya through SEAL training, the operator who'd saved her life twice before Syria took his. Viper 6, we are critically wounded. Need covering fire now, please. Silence, no response. Then explosions, gunfire, screaming. Maya pressed stop. The silence that followed was the kind that came before storms. McKinley's face had gone from confusion to something harder, something dangerous. Staff Sergeant Shelton, explain. Shelton stood rigid, hands clenched at his sides. Sir, that recording is out of context. I made a tactical decision based on threat assessment. My Marines were pinned down. I had to extract them first. Your Marines were 200 meters away with clear egress. The SEAL team was trapped on a rooftop with no exit route and wounded personnel. Maya's voice was quiet, but it carried. You chose to save people who were already safe and abandon people who were dying. I saved my team. You left mine to die. McKinley looked between them, saw Shelton's rage and Maya's cold fury, and the truth sitting in the space between like a grenade with the pin pulled. Lieutenant Commander, what happened to the 3 wounded SEALs? Sir, Petty Officer First Class Marcus Hale died of his wounds during evacuation. Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Chen was killed by enemy fire while calling for backup that never came. Lieutenant Junior Grade David Park bled out from shrapnel wounds before I could get him off the roof. She paused. I carried all 3 bodies down 4 flights of stairs by myself and loaded them onto the transport, while Staff Sergeant Shelton's Marines were already secured and celebrating a successful mission. The parade ground was so quiet you could hear flags moving in the breeze that had returned. And you're saying the citation I just read is false? Sir, I'm saying Staff Sergeant Shelton didn't provide covering fire, didn't expose himself to hostile action, didn't enable evacuation of wounded SEALs. He did the opposite. He abandoned us. Then he filed paperwork claiming heroism for actions he never performed. McKinley turned to Shelton. The general's face had gone from professional to personal. This wasn't ceremony anymore. This was judgment. Staff Sergeant, is this true? Shelton's jaw worked. His hands opened and closed. The careful control he'd maintained for 18 months was fracturing in real time, visible to everyone watching. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Corwin has been trying to destroy my career since Syria. She filed a false after-action report, violated security protocols, stalked me during a training exercise at Fort Mackenzie. She's unstable, vindictive. This is character assassination. I have evidence, Maya said quietly. Radio logs, sworn testimony from Marines present at Fort Mackenzie, photographic documentation of Staff Sergeant Shelton coordinating an assault on my position while I was serving as training evaluator, video of him approaching my observation post after dark with a knife. Everything documented, everything verified. She pulled a folder from her other pocket, handed it to McKinley. He opened it, flipped through photographs, read transcripts. His expression darkened with each page. These photos show you meeting with other Marines during what was supposed to be a solo evaluation. Shelton said nothing. This transcript shows you discussing plans to target Lieutenant Commander Corwin's position. Still nothing. McKinley closed the folder and set it down with care, the kind of care you used handling explosives. Staff Sergeant Derek Shelton, I am suspending this ceremony pending full investigation. You are hereby relieved of all duties and confined to barracks awaiting court-martial proceedings. Security, please escort Staff Sergeant Shelton from the platform. 2 military police stepped forward. Shelton looked at them, looked at McKinley, looked at Maya. The rage in his eyes was incandescent, pure hatred focused into a laser that could have burned through steel. This isn't over, he said, voice low, shaking with fury. Maya met his eyes without flinching. Yes, it is. They took his arms, started walking him toward the steps. He resisted for just a moment, muscles tensing like he might try something stupid. Then the fight went out of him all at once, shoulders sagging, head dropping, the walk of a man who just watched everything he'd built collapse into rubble. The crowd watched in silence as they led him away. Cameras captured every step. This was the ceremony that would make news, just not the story anyone expected. McKinley turned back to Maya. The anger was still there, but something else had joined it. Respect, maybe. Recognition. Lieutenant Commander Corwin, you could have brought this to my attention through official channels, could have filed formal complaints. Instead, you waited until the ceremony. Why? Maya thought about Syria, about carrying bodies downstairs while her arms screamed and her lungs burned and her radio played nothing but static. About 18 months of watching Derek Shelton get promoted and praised and recommended for medals, while the people he'd abandoned got buried and forgotten. Sir, official channels failed 18 months ago. They failed because inter-service politics mattered more than truth. They failed because protecting institutional reputation was more important than protecting the memory of 3 dead SEALs. She paused. I waited until now because I wanted everyone to hear it. The families, the command structure, the people who would have celebrated a false hero. I wanted them to know exactly what they were about to honor. McKinley nodded slowly. That took courage, Lieutenant Commander. Different kind than what we usually recognize, but courage all the same. He turned to address the crowd, 200 faces watching, waiting. This ceremony is concluded. What you witnessed here today is why we have verification protocols, why we demand evidence for extraordinary claims, why the truth matters more than convenient narratives. His voice hardened. 3 Navy SEALs died in Syria: Petty Officer Hale, Chief Chen, Lieutenant Park. They died because someone chose not to help them. Today we make sure their sacrifice is remembered correctly. He stepped down from the platform and walked directly to Maya, extended his hand. She took it. "Thank you for your service, Lieutenant Commander, and thank you for not letting this pass." "Sorry." He walked away toward headquarters. The crowd began to disperse, conversations starting low and building, the buzz of people processing what they'd just seen. Maya stood alone near the platform and watched them go. Footsteps approached from behind. She turned to find Corporal Vaughn, hands in pockets, looking younger than his 24 years. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say, what you did took guts, standing up there, playing that recording, knowing it would blow up everything." "Someone had to, Corporal. Briggs and we gave statements to the investigation board, told them everything about Fort McKenzie, about how Shelton planned to make it look like a training accident, how he tried to recruit us into keeping quiet." Vaughn's voice dropped. "I should have stopped him sooner, should have said something before it got that far." "You said something when it mattered. That counts." "Does it? 3 people died in Syria before anyone listened." Maya looked at him and saw the guilt there. The weight of knowing you could have done more, should have done more, didn't do more. She knew that weight, carried it herself. "Corporal, you can't change what happened. You can only make sure it doesn't happen again. You did that. Now you live with it and move forward." He nodded, didn't look convinced but accepted it. "What happens now to Shelton?" "Court-martial, probably multiple charges, conduct unbecoming, violation of training protocols, attempted assault, false official statements, maybe criminal negligence for Syria if the investigators can make it stick." She paused. "Whatever they charge him with, he's done. Dishonorable discharge minimum, prison time possible." "Good," Vaughn said. Then quieter, "Is that wrong? To be glad someone's career is destroyed?" "Depends on whether they deserved it. In this case." Maya looked toward the headquarters building where Shelton was being processed into custody. "In this case, he earned every bit of what's coming." Vaughn left. Maya stood alone on the parade ground and let the afternoon sun warm her face. Somewhere in Virginia, 3 families would get phone calls tonight. Official calls explaining that the medal ceremony had been suspended, that new information had come to light, that their loved ones' deaths were being reinvestigated. Those calls would hurt, would rip open wounds that had barely started healing, but they'd also carry something else: validation, acknowledgement, the knowledge that someone had fought for the truth even when it was hard, even when it cost. Her phone buzzed. Text message from Commander Cross. "Heard what happened. Well done. Report to my office tomorrow at 0800. We need to discuss your next assignment." She smiled, typed back, "Yes, sir." Another message, this one from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Sarah Chen's mother. General McKinley called, told me what you did today. Told me you've been fighting for 18 months to make sure people knew the truth. I can't thank you enough. My daughter would be proud." Maya's vision blurred. She blinked hard, typed back, "She was my friend. I owed her this." The response came quickly. "You gave her more than that. You gave her justice. Thank you." She stood there holding the phone and let herself feel it, the weight lifting, the debt paid, the promise kept. The sun tracked west. Shadows lengthened. The parade ground emptied until it was just her and the flags and the memory of what happened here. A ceremony that never finished, a medal that would never be awarded, a truth that finally got told. She turned and walked toward her quarters. Tomorrow would bring paperwork and formal statements and the grinding machinery of military justice. But tonight, she could rest knowing that Marcus Hale and Sarah Chen and David Park weren't just names on a casualty list anymore. They were people who'd been betrayed, people who'd been remembered, people whose deaths meant something because someone refused to let them be forgotten. 3 weeks later, Maya sat in a conference room at the Navy Annex in Washington, D.C. The walls were covered with photos and maps and documentation from 2 decades of special operations. This was where decisions got made about deployments and missions, and the kind of work that never made it into official records. Across from her sat Captain Elizabeth Morrison, SEAL Team 6 commander, a woman in her late 40s with gray threading through her hair and the kind of eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. Lieutenant Commander Corwin, I've read your file. Syria, Fort Mackenzie, the Medal of Valor incident. You've had an interesting few months. Yes, ma'am. The investigation into Staff Sergeant Shelton resulted in 11 separate charges. Court-martial is scheduled for next month. He'll almost certainly be convicted on at least half of them. Dishonorable discharge, prison time, complete destruction of everything he built. He earned it, ma'am. Morrison smiled, thin, sharp. He did. Question is, what did you earn? Maya wasn't sure how to answer that. Morrison pulled a folder from her briefcase and slid it across the table. This is an offer. Return to active duty with SEAL Team 6. Not training, not instruction, operational assignments. The kind of work you did before Syria took you off the board. Maya opened the folder, read the assignment brief, felt her pulse quicken. Ma'am, I was told my career in operations was over. That training duty was permanent. That was before you proved you could document a conspiracy, survive an assassination attempt, and take down a false hero in front of 200 witnesses. Morrison leaned forward. The Navy needs operators who can think under pressure, who can build cases as well as they can run missions, who understand that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons. What kind of operations are we talking about? Classified, high risk, zero publicity. The kind of thing where success means nobody ever knows it happened and failure means we never acknowledge you existed. She paused, interested. Maya thought about the last 18 months, about teaching survival to people who mostly didn't appreciate it, about carrying the weight of Syria while watching Shelton get rewarded, about the moment on that parade ground when she'd stood up and refused to let injustice pass unchallenged. Yes, ma'am, very interested. Good, you start in 2 weeks. First deployment is already being planned. Details will be provided once you're back in the compartment. Morrison stood, extended her hand. Welcome back to the fight, Lieutenant Commander. Maya shook her hand and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. She left the Navy Annex and walked out into D.C. summer heat. The city sprawled around her, monuments and museums and the machinery of government grinding away at problems that never got solved. Somewhere in this city, committees were meeting about Syria policy. Somewhere, families were grieving losses that could have been prevented. Somewhere, people who should have been held accountable were getting away with it. But not all of them. Not anymore. Her phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. She almost deleted it, then saw the preview. Heard you're going back to active duty. Congratulations. You earned it. If you're ever near Bragg, stop by. First beer is on me. It was signed with just initials, J.V. James Vaughn, the Marine who'd found his conscience, who'd chosen truth over loyalty to someone who didn't deserve it. She typed back, I'll take you up on that. Stay honest, Corporal. The reply came fast. Planning to. Someone taught me it matters. She smiled and pocketed the phone. 2 weeks. Then back to the world where missions happened in darkness and success meant silence, and the only people who knew what you'd done were the ones who'd been there with you. But first, one more thing to finish. Arlington National Cemetery sat quiet under afternoon sun, row after row of white marble stretching across hills that looked down on the nation those buried here had served. Maya walked the paths she'd memorized, found the section she needed, stopped in front of 3 headstones standing side by side. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Hale, Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Chen, Lieutenant Junior Grade David Park. She knelt in the grass between them and let herself remember. Not the deaths, not the blood and screaming and the weight of bodies carried downstairs, but the people they'd been before. Marcus with his terrible jokes and his instinct for knowing when someone needed encouragement. Sarah who could navigate by stars better than anyone Maya had ever known. David who'd been planning to propose to his girlfriend the week after they got back from Syria. "I kept my promise," she said quietly. "Took longer than it should have, but I got him. He's going to prison. The medal got canceled. Everyone knows what really happened now." The wind moved through trees planted between the graves. Somewhere nearby, a bugler practiced taps, the notes carrying clear and mournful. "I'm going back to active duty, real missions, the kind of work you'd recognize." She paused. "I'll try to be better at it, try to remember the things you taught me, try to make sure nobody else gets left behind." No response, just wind and distant traffic and the weight of memory. She stood, saluted, and walked back toward the cemetery entrance where her car waited. Tomorrow she'd start preparing for the new assignment. Tonight she'd allow herself to rest knowing that the debt was paid, the promise kept, the truth told. Behind her, 3 white stones caught the afternoon sun and held it like a promise that some things, once lost, could never be recovered. But some things, if you fought hard enough, could at least be honored. The gate closed behind her with a soft click. Ahead lay 2 weeks of preparation, then deployment back into the world she'd left 18 months ago. Back to missions that mattered and teams that trusted each other, and the kind of work where failure meant more than paperwork. She started the car and pulled onto the highway heading back toward Quantico. In the rearview mirror, Arlington receded into distance. 3 friends resting under marble, 3 promises kept, 3 debts paid in full. The road ahead stretched empty and open. She pressed the accelerator and drove toward whatever came next. Because Navy SEALs didn't quit, didn't surrender, didn't forget. They just adapted, improvised, and kept fighting until the mission was complete. And this mission finally was done.